Refrigerant recovery is the foundation for life cycle refrigerant management, as without safe refrigerant recovery, there cannot be reclamation or reuse. A-Gas Rapid Recovery is an on-site refrigerant recovery service that gives businesses an easy way to contain their used refrigerants.
Not a whole lot of companies do what we do. We handle some of the grunt work that they don't want to do, and we can do it 10 times as fast as they can. The recovery portion, the cylinder exchanges, and buying back used material that otherwise can't be used.
We play a big role with our contractors, whether that be HVAC, mechanical, or demolition contractors. Our whole purpose is to get on site and not only help them save money in the project, but offer an environmental solution.
We do not want any of these products getting vented to atmosphere, no matter how low the GWP is. Now it's not only the cylinder to recover the product, but it's making sure the technicians have equipment that are rated to work with flammable gases. That's really important for people.
So by us being able to contain it in cylinders, reclaim it, we're saving the environment one recovery at a time.
My name is Mike Idle. Today I wanted to give you an overview of Amatrol's T7300 HVAC control system. This system is designed to align a hands-on workstation, as you see here, along with interactive curriculum to teach the operation, installation, application, and troubleshooting of control systems related to the HVAC industry. As components and features of HVAC systems get smarter in both the residential and commercial fields, it's important for current and future HVAC technicians to be trained up. What types of circuits are used, familiarity, learning, operation, maintenance, troubleshooting are all important areas to cover in that.
Here at NAVAC, we are obsessed with delivering the best HVAC tools on the market. Our tools are built for professionals and engineered for precision, just like Harley-Davidson motorcycles. NAVAC Nation, it's time for you to feel the power both on and off the job site. Let's stand up in our pursuit of perfection. From coast to coast, NAVAC forges the path forward. Wherever you are, we will be right beside you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC show. It's a small crowd. Hopefully we'll have more people joining us shortly. We just realized like a few minutes before the show, Todd was like, hey, Cliff, I don't see any posts out there on social media. And Restream did something funky where it didn't send it out to everybody. So those that are joining, we're grateful that you are taking the time to hang out. You know when the show is going to be every week and you hopped in here. Let us know where you're joining from. I am at the new location in Coatesville, Indiana. Got everything moved. We've got the new studio set up right here on site, which is really cool. I can go from home to office. Melanie gets sick of me in the house. She can say, go to work. And I can go, okay, I'll do that. I'll walk outside. So it's quite the enjoyable thing. Now, here in the Midwest, temperatures are really decent right now. So it is mid 70s with around a 40% relative humidity. It's not too shabby. Professor Silberstein, what about you? What kind of temperatures have you got down in southern Florida right now?
Oh no, we're in the mid 80s, actually moving up a little bit, but we have what's called vapor soup. You know, we have we have really high humidity down here. July and August, humidity is really high. Makes me miss my my house in Southern California, where we did not get rain from February to November of every year.
That is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Todd, what about you over on the west side of the country?
Well, where Eugene used to live, I didn't live too far from there. So, you know, it's a nice dry 98 degrees today. So we're going to talk about 98 degrees, I thought, today, right?
Yes, absolutely
Yeah.
we are. Yeah, we're going to be talking about what Jason and I are experiencing here in the Midwest that most people around the country have never heard the expression before. And we're going to help you understand what that is. It's been in the news quite a bit, and we want to make sure you understand that. And we're going to dive into the why. We're going to talk about what it looks like on the psychrometric chart. We're going to talk about how much capacity it takes to change this effect to make things more comfortable, how much moisture is in the air. It's going to be a lot of interesting things. And I have a feeling this is going to be one of those episodes that gets a lot of replays because it's such an interesting topic. Okay, here in the Midwest, this time of the year, end of July, 1st of August, we have this thing called corn sweat. And it's insanely miserable outside. And how to compare that, it's going to shock a lot of our audience when we start looking at how miserable it can actually be here in the Midwest. And we're going to compare it to different places around the world. Okay, so let's start with the basics, right? Let's look at it, because if you don't know what corn sweat is, this is corn sweat. So we took this photo earlier this week. Katie joining us from Hillsboro, Missouri. She knows exactly what corn sweat is. When we look across this field, now remember, this was at about sunrise. So we did have a little bit of dew rising, but nothing like what was happening over the cornfield. You drive down the road and it's as clear as can be. But when you look across the field, that's moisture hanging in the air just over the crops. Now you can see it's relatively low in the air in comparison to things around it. Okay, clear up to the crop line. Then we have a layer of significant moisture that hovers around. So how does this phenomenon happen? Well, it's all about moisture. So today's episode is all about moisture and what it does to the air around it. So Jason sent this to me. He's like, hey, I think I got a topic we need to talk about. And I was like, oh man, we got to run with it. So Jason, let's start right here.
So you and I had previously done a show on wet bulb, right? Do you remember? So this is kind of directly related to that, right?
Okay.
Clifton and I live in the Midwest. Specifically, we're dealing with this particular issue. And Eugene will point out the specifics on it. But we were experiencing extremely high real field temperatures, right? Different from other parts of the country and it's directly related to this corn sweat, right? When we get these temperatures and the corn begins to release all of this moisture into the atmosphere, the surrounding areas are kind of hit with this extra humidity, if you will, this extra latent load that other parts of the country are not necessarily getting. And if you look at the numbers on the slide here, 2,000 to 4,000 gallons of water per day per acre.
It's crazy to think about. You know, what's happening, we think about the corn growing for months. Well, it's absorbing moisture through its root system and some through the air, but primarily through its root system. We're holding moisture inside on the cob and in the kernel that is surrounded by the shuck. And then late in the season, we have the tassels that grow out of the top of the shuck. Well, as those tassels are growing higher, they're like a wick to the moisture inside. It's the corn's natural way of starting to dry out to turn all of those kernels into potential seeds. But when it does it, it's a swamp.
Right. It significantly impacts your humidity, your wet bulb. If you're in the area, the outdoor, like your outdoor activities and things, what you're going to want to do and not want to do. If you have homes in this area, it's definitely going to impact the air conditioning system and its capacity. And we're going to dive into that today to see just what effect this has and on system design, system operation, and the human body.
You know, Professor Silberstein was going through some numbers right before the show, thinking about this. As soon as we popped this up, the calculator went to work. So where did we end up just from this slide alone?
Yeah, I did some number calculations because that's what I sit up all night doing, and that number of 2 to 4,000 gallons of water per acre per day, kind of struck. And then to put it into perspective, in this, forgetting about other Midwestern states, but in Indiana alone, there are 5 million acres of cornfields. So that's a total of about 175 billion corn plants. So it's one thing if you take a little spray mister and you spray up in the air and you get that nice little mist of water, but imagine that 175 billion times. So if we take a look at what a widespread problem and concern this is, 5 million acres is just about 8,500 square miles, which is about 20% of the footprint of the state of Indiana. So you're looking at about an area equal to about twice the size of the state of Connecticut. So if you take that number of 2,000 to 4,000 gallons of water per acre per day, you're looking at about between 16 and 20 billion gallons of water, all right, being introduced to the air every single day. Now, like you said, it's not every day for the whole year. It is, for a small period. But just to give you a sense, I mean, that's 165 billion pounds of water. And to be able to visualize it, if you think about, if you watch the Summer Olympics and you see an Olympic-sized swimming pool, an Olympic-sized swimming pool holds 660,000 gallons of water. So if you do the math, picture 30,000 swimming pools full of water, Olympic-sized swimming pools of that much water being introduced to the air every day.
Every day.
Every day. Yeah.
That's almost unfathomable.
Isn't it crazy? I had to do the numbers twice because I'm a numbers guy and I like to come up with some crazy things to make things stick into people's heads.
Visualization. And
when I saw 30,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, I kind of freaked out. So I had to check the batteries and recharge my cell phone and just to make sure that the numbers were right. And they were, unless my calculator is lying to me, and I don't think it is.
Yeah,
no, picture 30,000 Olympic swimming pools in the state of Indiana every day of water being introduced to the air,
and that's going to have an effect, right? That's not going to go unnoticed, right?
Yeah,
that is going to cause some changes throughout the state.
Well, Jason, think about it. Corn creates its own weather. Because
it does, yes.
Corn creates its own clouds. Corn creates its own thunderstorms. Corn creates nighttime humidity issues. Lowers nighttime cooling. Lower temperatures keeps the humidity up. So there are a lot of things, because as we lower the temperature of air overnight, what happens? If we lower the temperature of air, the relative humidity of the air goes
up.
So yeah, it's called an agricultural feedback loop, which is actually kind of interesting. That happens in Midwest states, especially Indiana. We're talking about kind of crazy stuff.
And if you know your areas, like Jose, I love that you're sharing this, because this is going to be very relevant for you here in just a minute. If you can think about, what does a 98-degree day look like in your area? Because we're going to show some comparisons here in a minute to get an understanding of that. And Masad, I'd love to share with us, like on a hot day, and where are you from? Or Moad, I'm sorry, where are you from? And let us know about that, because we're intrigued with these numbers. All right, so we're probably going to come back to this. I want to make sure that everyone gets a view of this phenomenon. So Jason, this was in your area, Northern Indiana, and this was on July 1st. So tell us a little bit about these.
So typically we don't see a whole lot of difference. We'll see some, but if you look at the actual temperature, like in that center one, the temperature outside is 90, but the real feel is 107. It's 17 degrees higher than the actual dry bulb. And if you look at the one on the left, it says refill in the shade.
Right.
What this is telling you is, listen, this isn't really being caused by the sun, and stepping into the shade is not going to help you a whole lot in this circumstance, because it's moisture in the air, and it's going to prevent your body from cooling, right? Our natural cooling mechanism is sweating, right? And that moisture evaporates into the air around you. But what if that air around you is already full, right? It's already, it's saturated. And where did that water come from? The corn, right? It's like, as Eugene said, it's making its own weather here. And so again, this is a very extreme, again, as we mentioned, phenomenon. This is not something, right? There's a window where this happens, right?
Yeah.
But when it does happen, it is extremely uncomfortable. Systems work extremely hard. Your body is going to have to work extremely hard to cool itself off. And even moving to the shade in this instance, it isn't really going to help you.
Well, Jason, check this out, because I mean, you touched on something really, really important, because you see people go to Las Vegas and they go, oh yeah, it's 105 degrees, 110 degrees, but it's a dry heat. So we can offset high temperatures. We can be comfortable at higher temperatures at lower relative humidities. And similarly, we can be comfortable at lower temperatures if the humidity is higher. The higher humidities help us trap heat. So when we have high temperatures and low relative humidity, we could be comfortable. When we have low temperatures and high relative humidity, we can be comfortable. But think about Chicago. We have low temperatures and low relative humidity. That's bone-chilling cold. You hear about bone-chilling. Well, on the flip side, if you have high temperatures and high relative humidity, that's when you get these really uncomfortable conditions where you get real field temperatures that are so much higher than the outside temperature, because you can't sweat. You can't perspire. That's our, like you said, Jason, that's our cooling mechanism.
Now, down at the farm where I spent the last few weeks, those of you that don't know, I was in transition between homes. So Jason's in northern Indiana. I am at the farm in central Indiana, but I'm in the lower lands. So my elevation is very low. There's a lot of rivers, a lot of creeks, and I'm completely surrounded by cornfields. And what I was able to capture really shows exactly what Eugene was talking about. You add the two of those together. Our hottest day that we had was a 98-degree dry bulb day, but we had 67% relative humidity from the corn sweating, which pushed my heat index to 130 degrees in Indiana.
So what's really unique is if you were to look around the corn, like if you look outside that bubble, the humidity and the moisture in the air drops significantly, right? It isn't until you get into that corn bubble, so to speak, that these numbers just skyrocket. And that, again, is the effect of the corn itself.
Yeah. On those days, when I would walk outside, you would be sweating within a minute or two. And it's quite the interesting phenomenon. So let's look at this slightly different now. Let's get into the HVAC mind. Now that we're understanding what it is, let's compare these areas with real stats. Let's plot these on the psychrometric chart so that we can look at how much moisture are we actually talking about around us. So we're going to use 3 different locations. So let's start here in Indiana. So I grabbed all that data that I had from that day. We're going to use a 98-degree Fahrenheit dry bulb as our baseline. So if anyone that's joining us, if you can capture any data from a 98-degree Fahrenheit day in your area, it'll help us compare and plug this in on the psychrometric chart for you as well. So, all right, let's think about this, fellas. On that 98-degree Fahrenheit day with 67% relative humidity, think about the moisture in the air. The moisture in the air ended up around 185 grains per pound of air. Now, let's look at the lower extremity of that. Let's compare that. I had a friend I was talking to on the phone that same week that lived in Arizona, and he said, We've got 15% relative humidity here in Arizona. I don't even know what 15% relative humidity feels like.
Right. Yeah.
I don't even know if the lumber out in my garage gets down to 15% relative humidity in the middle of the winter, because we humidify a lot here in the Midwest. But on a 98-degree day, he had 15% relative humidity, which gives us about 40 grains of moisture per pound of air. So let's go the lowest extremity. I would consider that one of the lowest. Todd, do you ever get any lower than 15%?
Not really until you get to the winter, but
Okay.
yeah, I mean, that's uncommon.
Okay, so we'll use 15% as the lower extremity. Let's go to what we consider the highest. I would consider the Amazon rainforest the highest, right? Because 100% humidity, we're going to be saturated at 100% relative humidity. In the Amazon rainforest on a 98-degree Fahrenheit day, we can hold as much as 281 grains per pound. Now, let's put this into something we can view as tangible as educators. Something that we can take the data and actually have a reference. I mean, that's what all of us are here for. That's how we've gotten to where we are in our careers, is we love to take things that may not be as understandable to everyone and help make them understandable so we can share that information, we can teach to the next generations. For me personally, I did not have my foundational education in HVAC, right? I became a technician before I learned how to do things right. So for me, learning psychrometrics was a very big deal. I needed some tangibility. Professor Eugene does so much of that in his classrooms with air. That's the reason I was so excited he was going to join us today. For me, I need to visualize some things. So let's think about how much water this could actually be. So if we had shot glasses that didn't have alcohol in them and they had water in those, what does it look like? Well, 40 grains, that's not even hardly sipping the bottom of the barrel. At 185 grains, we can get a fourth of a shot. And this is using a standard shot glass, right? This is using a 1.5 ounce standard size shot glass. And if I was in the Amazon rainforest in that same shot glass, I could actually have getting close to half, right? I could have 4 teaspoons. 42% of that glass would be moisture. That's hard.
So Clifton, you're taking 98-degree air from each of these 3 locations, and then you're wringing it out, squeezing it, and
the water out.
The moisture that comes out of that air, right?
Getting all the latent potential out of there and being down to sensible only.
Okay.
Getting dry. Okay. We wring it all out. That seems like a lot, but like Professor Silberstein was doing earlier, showing us the big picture, let's think about that in something that would make sense in the classroom. Guys, what about a house? How much water would that be in a house? Let's take a 2-square-foot home that has 8-foot ceilings. That's a pretty common home size here in the Midwest. Well, how much moisture could be in the same house in Indiana versus the same house in Arizona versus the same house in the middle of the Amazon rainforest? And it blew my mind to think about. So we take that same 2,000 square foot times the 8-foot height. Let's get us into cubic feet, right? 16,000 cubic feet at 98 degrees. Now remember, this is assuming that we have a house in each area and we turned off the air conditioning. We opened all the windows and the doors. It's a 98-degree day. We close them up, and this is what we got inside. Well, if we could ring the house, now where are we at to, Todd?
It's a lot of water.
Yeah, so we're talking gallons now, not shot glasses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
but that's a good visualization. Like, how much would be in my house? Well, if I was my friend out in Arizona, I couldn't even get a gallon out of that water.
Right.
Here in Indiana, that's 3.5 gallons. So anyone in Indiana, in the Midwest, when your air conditioner is running, you're squeezing out.
You said it right there. This is what the air conditioner, aside of the heat, the actual dry bulb, the sensible heat, it now has to contend with all of this moisture as
Just
well.
hanging out in the air. And now, if we're in the Amazon rainforest, now I'm talking over 5 gallons of water hanging around in the air. That's a lot.
That's going to have an effect, right?
Yes.
As we brought up earlier, the human body has a cooling mechanism. It's sweating. When you sweat and you have the actual sweat on your body, that's not doing any cooling. The cooling doesn't happen until that sweat evaporates into the air and it brings the heat away from the body. If the sweat stays on you and doesn't evaporate, then you're not really cooling. You're not doing anything. The heat is staying there. And when you have gallons and gallons of water like this, the sweat is going to stay on your body and you're not going to cool, right? It is not the actual sweat running down your body that cools you. It's the evaporation of that moisture, that latent transfer that takes the heat away. And keep in mind, it's not just humans that have this sweat mechanism to cool. There are a lot of different mammals that have this sweat mechanism. So think of all the farm animals that are outside, the bovines specifically, that are near anywhere you usually have cornfields. You typically have farm animals. They're probably struggling. They just can't tell us, but they're struggling as well, right? They're like, man, what is going on? This is kind of crazy here.
Right. Bob, you're wet and stinky. Why are you having a hard time
What
breathing?
happened here, right?
And it's not just in that aspect. Think about what it does to things that are utilizing properties of air. Todd, you had mentioned earlier, as a pilot, the humidity has an effect on flight as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I, like you, didn't really get into to HVAC. I mean, I grew up in it, but my education was towards aviation. And when I was flying, we had what called density altitude, right? Of course, as altitude increases, the available air to lift also decreases, but also when there's a high humidity, it does the same thing. So less lift. I mean, Eugene, you said it best earlier when we were pre-meeting with that on the.
Well, you know what's interesting about that? So looking at this slide, you would say, wow, the air that's in that house that's in the Amazon rainforest must be heavier than the air in Arizona.
Right.
But the interesting thing is the air in that house in Arizona is actually heavier than the house that is in Indiana, that's in your backyard, that's in the rainforest. Because as we humidify air, the air actually gets lighter. So I'm gonna nerd out for a minute.
Oh yeah, we're ready for this.
We're ready.
Yeah, me too.
So when we say that an air conditioning system has to work harder, we'll talk about that in a second, but it's actually the blowers in an air conditioning system that are working less hard when the air is humid. So check this out.
Okay.
So air, and if I need to repeat something, let me know, because I'm going to geek out right now.
Yeah, I'm ready.
So air
Where's my
is
beer?
made up of primarily nitrogen and oxygen. All right. So we have nitrogen molecules and oxygen molecules, right? We have 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen in our air.
A little bit of extra. A little done.
Yeah, 1% other. And that always freaks me out, that other. So a nitrogen atom weighs 14 atomic mass units, which are units of mass at the atomic level. In other words, really small.
Okay.
So a nitrogen atom weighs 14 atomic mass units, and a nitrogen molecule, N2, weighs 28 atomic mass units.
Okay.
Oxygen, right? An oxygen atom weighs 16 atomic mass units. So an oxygen molecule, 2 oxygen atoms, weighs 32. So most of our air is made up of these molecules that weigh either 28 atomic mass units or 32 atomic mass units. Okay? Now, when we humidify air, we're adding water molecules. Now, a water molecule weighs 18 atomic mass units. There's 1 oxygen atom, 16 atomic mass units, and 2 hydrogen atoms, and each one weighs 1. So 16 plus 1 is 18. So when we add moisture to an air sample, we're adding water molecules to the air, but that pushes nitrogen and oxygen
Out of the
molecules.
way.
So now, if the air pressure stays the same, which is a requirement for this, the number of molecules has to remain the same. So if I put a bunch of light molecules into a house, which are water, it has to push heavy molecules out. So the density of air actually goes down as we humidify, which is actually kind of interesting, because now we say, oh, if I have high humidity, how does that make my system less efficient? Why does it cost more? Why is the air conditioning system running harder? Well, the air conditioning compressor is running harder. We'll explain why in a little bit. But as humidity increases, the blowers in our systems, the blowers that are in our air handlers, actually don't work as hard because the air is less dense. What makes these systems work harder when we have a lot of moisture is the increased latent load on the system. Remember, an air conditioning system does two things. It dehumidifies and cools. So if we have no latent load on the system, in other words, we're only dropping the temperature of the air, it's going to be easy, because the specific heat of air is only 0.24 BTUs per pound. I only need I need a quarter of a BTU to change the temperature of 1 pound of air 1 degree Fahrenheit. But I need a lot more of that to start pulling moisture out of the air. The latent heat of vaporization in water is 970 BTUs per pound. To take 1 pound of water and condense it from vapor to liquid, condensate that I could pull off my system, is almost 1,000 BTUs for each pound. So it's 4,000 times as much heat energy required to drop the humidity than it is to drop the temperature. So think about the latent heat removal. So now we got to pull moisture out. So we have high QL, latent load, lower sensible heat ratios. All right, we need thicker evaporator coils, because in order to dehumidify, the air has to pass through multiple passes on the evaporator coil. And then we're in a world where we always oversize our air conditioning systems. So if we oversize the air conditioning system, it's going to satisfy the sensible load quickly and turn off. And now we're not getting the dehumidification we need. So now we end up with moisture problems inside the structure. So,
which is what we do here in the Midwest, unfortunately.
It is. My dad always had the mentality that he wanted to, whenever he sized up an air conditioning system for a customer here not here in New York, but when we lived in New York, that he wanted the air conditioning system to be able to cool the entire neighborhood on the hottest day of the year if you opened the windows and took the roof off the house. So if a house needed 3 tons of air conditioning, he would install a 5-ton system, because he didn't want to get that nuisance call in the middle of August.
Right.
But with that mentality, if we're running an air conditioning system with a high latent load, the oversized air conditioning system is going to cool the air down quickly, and you're going to end up with a cold, wet house.
That's all right. Uncomfortable.
So what you had mentioned, Eugene, if you oversize the unit, it's going to satisfy the sensible load relatively quick before the rest of the air in the house has had a chance to get through that coil and have the moisture removed from it. So we have this wet, sticky. So my first reaction as a homeowner is to walk over to the thermostat and drop it a few more degrees, right? And we're going to keep doing this. And the problem then becomes, now all of the surfaces in my house are really cold. And that remaining moisture is now going to start condensing on all of those cold surfaces.
So for people that are listening today, if you go to your house and your house is cool and your walls are dripping, you probably have an oversized air conditioning system.
Well, speaking of sizes, let's go back to our example houses and talk about that for a second.
Do it.
Because this is another opportunity for us to talk about this in a relative comparison for equipment sizing. Let's take all of this moisture in these 3 different homes, and let's just think about, well, how much capacity would I need to move this water out of there? Because that's really what we're trying to do,
Big
right?
word there, right?
Yeah, we're in the
Capacity.
conditioning air business. We move heat and we condition air. That's what we do. So we need, at least in a couple of these homes, to reduce some moisture, but let's try to make sure that we're talking about even playing grounds. Because you'd mentioned a very important fact about removing that moisture out of the air so we can get down to moving that sensible heat away. Let's look at these 3 different homes with all of that moisture and what size we would need. Okay, let's think about this. If we were in Arizona, now let's try to keep things on a uniform playing ground. Remember these 3 houses. Let's assume all 3 of these homes had the 98-degree days. We had 15%
Identical.
relative humidity in Arizona. We had 67% here in Indiana. We had 100% in rainforest, all on a 98-degree Fahrenheit dry bulb day. And we opened up our house. We let our entire inside house fill up with all of that moisture. But we want to get it to a comfortable point. And let's just assume that we're going to call comfortable 70 degrees Fahrenheit with 50% relative humidity and a slight breeze. That's what we're going to call it. Okay.
I'll agree to that.
That sound comfortable?
I'll buy that.
How much work is it going to take to get all 3 of those homes, those exact same homes, to that point if we try to do it in an hour? Okay. Arizona, easy peasy, because we're not having to do all of our work on the latent heat removal. We're not having to pull that moisture out of there. Just over a half of a ton.
Yeah, as Eugene said, we're probably adding moisture to the air over there.
If we're going to get comfortable, we're turning on moisture in Arizona. Okay, let's go to Indiana. That's pretty realistic. Those that install air conditioning systems in Indiana, 2,000 square foot home, you might have a 2.5 ton air conditioner. Probably less than that if we go through sizing. We're not going to get into sizing. We're just doing a comparative analysis today. Now we're talking about removing 30,000 BTUs out of that same cubic space, that 16,000 cubic feet. Well, now we're talking about 2.5 tons of work. But if I was in the middle of the Amazon rainforest at 100% relative humidity, I have to work my butt off on getting the moisture out of there, which is going to take a lot of work to remove that latent heat to get us down to that sensible so we can drop the temperature. It would take almost 4 tons.
Look at the significant amount of water being removed right there, right?
Yeah, and that's just the latent load.
Right, we're looking at the water removed. We're not removing any water, obviously, in Arizona, but when you move here to Indiana, you're looking at 2.4 gallons of water being condensed out of the air. That's significant.
Yeah, in an hour.
Per hour, yes.
Kendrick, you're such a good thing to talk about, right? We're actually, when we start talking about metering devices, we're actually just talking about the efficiency of that equipment in removing it, right? So we can do it with a variety of different ways. So we're just talking about the actual moisture in the air and the heat that is in the air.
And what's required to deal with that.
You know, as we start looking at HVAC systems, we need to start having a significant focus on that proper sizing, because it's so critical. Here's an example. Even though here in Indiana, we had that 98-degree Fahrenheit with a 67% relative humidity, I had a ton of moisture in the air. If any of you are interested, if you go back to some of the previous videos, we did a load calculation on my little barn dominium that we were staying at, where that number came from. We used Conduit Tech to do a 3D model of it, did a load calculation. Load calculation came in fairly low. I was able to select an inverter that matched it perfectly. And on that same day, where if you walk outside and it was miserable, if you stayed inside, we were actually running at 72 degrees Fahrenheit with a 40% relative humidity, and my wife was freezing. As soon as you walked outside, boom, you were sticky immediately.
Glasses fog up, yeah.
So the proper sizing is absolutely critical when we're trying to maintain a certain condition. But what we're really here to talk about is air and the moisture that is in the air and how it affects comfort and the capacity to maintaining to get there. It's fascinating to think about.
Yeah.
And the effect, again, this isn't weather related, right? This is from the geographic location we happen to be sitting in. And we're talking in this specific episode, the corn sweat, right? This is things that are here that are affecting the local weather and that are going to affect the operation of our air conditioning systems, how we function as people, right? We're going to go outside. Oh, I have a soccer game. Well, not today, right? Everything, the real field, the wet bulb, they're too high. And again, this is the effect that this has, this moisture. We don't see it as moisture. When you live in Indiana and you look out over the roads and the highways and things, all you really see is corn, right? You don't put two and two together that corn is releasing an insane amount of moisture into the air that is definitely affecting your weather in this area right now. It's tough to put those two together, but that is what is actually happening.
And if we go back to look at that,
why do you look so young in that picture, though? Like, you grabbed a nice picture of you.
I grabbed a nice picture of all of you all. AI generated, by the way. Oh. That looked pretty good.
Did I fall? Did I fall on the corn stalk back there?
You came, you came in late on this conversation, Todd.
You might have passed out further back in the trail there.
That's right. So I'm sure there's a lot of people out there. We have a nice crowd today. Thank you all for hanging in here. Pablo, Brian, so glad you're hanging out here with us. And yeah, I thought we gathered a really good panel here to have this conversation today because we needed it. When Jason and I started having this conversation, it was all about in Indiana because we're feeling it. But then we're like, there's a lot to this. Let's bring in some other perspectives to help blend this conversation out. And so we're very fortunate to have, our team here being able to talk about this and this unusual phenomenon. It'll be gone in a few weeks, but when it's here, it's miserable. Today, remember I was saying today, we're mid 70s and we're probably in the 40% relative humidity. It's very comfortable. A week ago, it was miserable, but that's why. So any questions from the audience, any pieces that we need to go back over? Because I would really love for us to dive a little bit deeper into, Professor, if you don't mind.
So real quick, I want to point out, if you're a teacher or a trainer or an instructor and you have a class, this is a very good real world, real life scenario using the psychrometric chart that you can use in the classroom or wherever you do your training to illustrate exactly how to utilize this psychrometric chart and how it affects the weather, how it affects the systems. We talked about oversized, undersized, all of that thing. So this is a really good real world example of when and how to utilize this.
Jason, I'm so glad you brought that up because in one of my labs at the college, to do this very similar lesson on the psychrometric chart, I had 3 massive humidifiers. And my students would go into the lab and they would take air readings, right? Dry bulb, wet bulb, plot it out on the psychrometric chart. We would fire up the 3 humidifiers, go into the classroom and let the humidifiers do their thing. And then an hour later, we would go back into the same lab and take repeat the set of readings and then compare what happened. And again, they're taking the dry bulb temperature reading. Dry bulb temperature is not changing. We're not heating or cooling the air in the lab, right? But we're seeing the absolute humidity change, and we can actually see the effects of humidification on an airstream, which is actually really cool. Yeah. So if you're in the classroom, come up with some creative ideas. I mean, we have members on our team who, are retired teachers who've been in the classroom for decades and decades. I don't like to admit it. I have 30 plus years in front of the classroom. Jason has a bunch. So we've all, and, Clifton's been a trainer. So we've all had, Todd is a trainer. So we all have a lot of tricks up our sleeve. And as teachers, don't feel that you need to reinvent the wheel every time you need to come up with a creative way to teach something. You need to network. You need to chat with your fellow instructors because the older people in the classroom have done a lot of the legwork for you already. We've already come up with creative ways to teach things. So, for example, when I was teaching pressure enthalpy, for example, we say, oh, well, what's the effect of suction line insulation? So I would have a system installed and I would have students take temperature readings, and then I would rip the suction line insulation off and have students take temperature readings again. But that got expensive. I had a limited budget. So what did I do? I got a roll of heat tape that I put underneath the suction line insulation. So now to simulate ripping the insulation off the suction line, all I did was energize the heater on the suction line. So now I simulated removing the suction line insulation without having to do that. So if you have teachers and trainers and educators at your disposal, which all of you do, make use of it. And I just have one other quick point, though, because we're talking about transpiration, the corn sweat. So that's the technical term for base transpiration. Yeah. So basically,
that's a big word for Elmo. I kind of like that.
That's got 4 syllables, guys. You got to slow down for me.
Yeah, I got bigger ones. So the corn plants absorb water from the roots, and then the plants give off their moisture to the air, right, through a process called transpiration. But it's not only corn that does that. There are other crops that do that. So, for example, soybeans, right? Soybeans are grown in our country. They transpire less than corn, but we have so many more soybean plants than we do corn plants. So it makes an effect. We don't grow a whole lot of rice here, but if you think about it, I spent January and February of this year in Asia, and they have so many rice fields. And I was thinking about the rice fields because the rice plants, they give off moisture to the air as well from transpiration. But if you've ever seen a rice field, rice plants are grown in flooded fields. They flood them with water. So when we are dealing with rice fields, we're not only dealing with the transpiration, the moisture being given off by the plants, but we're also dealing with evaporation of the fields themselves. So when you combine the effects of evaporation of the water from the ground or the surface water in the field with the transpiration from the plant, you get this thing called evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration. 7th syllable.
You're going to have to make a t-shirt out of that one. Yeah, that's a good one right there.
Evapotranspiration is the combined effects of evaporation and transpiration, which is actually kind of neat. So it's not only corn, but obviously in Indiana,
it's a big deal. Yeah,
it's pretty wild.
Well,
so just to throw this out there, we titled this Corn Sweat, right? I was talking to a colleague in Northern California. When I said that word, never heard it, thought I was making it up, didn't know it was a thing, right? He's like, are you just messing with me? So again, when you get outside the local geographically, nobody's ever heard of this, right? No one knows what, but it is significant enough for those of us that live in this bubble and the effects that it has on quite a few things that for us, it's in the news, it's trending, it's all of this. And we're just trying to bring this out to those of you that live outside this bubble. Hey, this is a thing. This is real. And it's something that not only does the human body have to deal with, but our air conditioners as well. It's a temporary thing, right? It's seasonal. But when you do anything large scale, right, in mass like this, this is what tends to happen.
Mauad brought up a point earlier I wanted to re-reference. Hopefully you're still hanging in with us. It is something that we're probably going to be more aware of as we start witnessing at least a warming planet. Howard and I got on this conversation today. Anyone can argue why our planet is warming, but you cannot argue that the planet is warming, right? We are seeing significant changes worldwide. And these are the kind of things we need to be aware of and to be able to teach on. And Jason, you mentioned about capacity, and Keith, so true that we have to be aware of and think about. Here in the Midwest, my design temperature is not 98 degrees Fahrenheit with a 67 degree relative humidity or 67% relative humidity. It's just not, right? So there are going to be systems struggling, especially if we get into commercial areas where we're opening doors more often as people are coming in and out. We're introducing a lot of humidity into the systems. Relative humidity is a key factor, just like Professor Silberstein was saying earlier, on the amount of work that the system has to do based on the amount of moisture in the air. So
said that,
yeah.
Clifton. I'm glad you
Oh,
said
yeah.
that. Design,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
How many days now it's becoming more and more and more where the system is experiencing above design temperatures and humidities, right?
Right.
It used to just be, all right, a couple of days, your unit's going to struggle a little bit. It may run a little warmer, but the design, let's say 95 and 50, right? 95 degree dry bulb outside with a 50% humidity. And when you get over that, the unit may have to run a little longer or may struggle, but you're only going to see that a few days a year.
Right.
And the problem is those few days are becoming more than a few days, right? Year over year,
3
it went
weeks.
from 3 days, right,
We
to
stayed
6
above
days.
95.
Now we're at 21 days per year, per season, where we are above design conditions for that unit that's installed in your home.
Yep. So how many days a year do you get the hottest day of the year?
Right.
One, right?
Should be that one random one.
Yeah. So if my old man was in the industry now, he would be designing systems for the hottest
That
day.
one day.
So if you design a system for the hottest day of the year, your system is going to be oversized 90%
every other day. Right. Yeah. Every other day, it's going to be way too big, right?
Exactly.
So the other thing I'll point out while we're on this topic,
Yes,
it's something that Professor Eugene Silberstein has said ever since I've known him, and it's rubbed off on me, is ABC, airflow before charging. One of the significant factors in removing humidity is the volume of air moving over that evaporator, and how much, like if we're moving too much or not enough. We can measure with a thermometer, right? We can throw a thermometer in this duct and this duct, and you can see how much heat, sensible heat, is being removed, right? But your gauges and your thermometers are not going to tell you the latent side of things, right? So how do we know that latent heat is even being removed, right? We're going to look at that drain line, and I guess we could put a Gatorade
It's squeezing
bottle or
water,
something under
Jason.
there, right? Yeah.
that thing's being like crazy.
What we're
It's gotta be
looking
running
at
right.
is the TD, the temperature difference, the difference between the entering air and the saturation temperature in the evaporator. And for comfort cooling, we're looking at 30 to 35 degrees. The smaller that temperature difference gets, the less humidity you're going to remove. So we want to try and keep that temperature difference. We want to make sure that we're at the right volume of air moving over there, because that directly affects how much humidity we're going to remove.
Jason, let's just clarify that real quick, because you said temperature difference, TD.
Yeah.
That's the difference. A lot of people in our field, they use that as the difference between return air and supply air.
Right.
That's your delta T. Your TD is the difference between the return air's dry bulb temperature and the temperature of the evaporator coil. All right. So when we're talking about a delta T, it's a change in temperature of the same medium. Air temperature minus air temperature, whereas temperature difference, TD, is a difference between the air temperature return and the saturation temperature of your evaporator. So you can have a TD between the outside ambient temperature and the condenser saturation temperature. So it's semantics, but we just wanted
to clarify, Eugene, you're a superhero, you're my hero, and I want to know where you're hiding your cape.
That's right.
No, it's under your shirt, Jason.
I think capes are.
This is a big thing, though. When you hear us say TD, we are referring to, again, the return air temperature coming in and the saturation temperature in the evaporator. And for comfort cooling, we're looking at 30 to 35 degrees. If you move into refrigeration, walk in, reach in, you're at a 10-degree TD or a 20-degree, because we don't want to dry out the produce, right? We want to remove heat, but we want to leave that moisture in the air for the produce. But for comfort cooling, we need that at a larger 30, 35 degrees.
You know what, Jason? Quick thought now. We're going to be wrapping up real quick. So think about a walk-in box that was used to store beer and soda. Okay. So you have a walk-in box that was designed for beer and soda. All right. So now what happens if you now use that box? You're not using it for beer and soda anymore, but instead you put in tomatoes and cucumbers and lettuce.
Veggies. Yeah.
What happens to the quality of that produce?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's really important that when we select evaporator coils, we do that with the sensible heat ratio in mind, because it's the thickness of the evaporator coil. How many tubes in that coil? So again, getting a little bit off topic, but it really does have to do with the humidity of the conditioned space.
There are some instances where we want to remove as much as possible, as quick as possible. And there are other instances where we don't want to remove as much. Again, as you mentioned, for the tomatoes and things. And this is something we are HVACR. All right. AC and R. AC is air conditioning, R refrigeration. When we're doing AC, we want to have that very high TD, and we're trying to really pull out that humidity. And when we're doing the R side of things, like think flowers or produce, we don't want to really we're going to pull some out, but we don't want to pull a lot of it out, or we're going to damage the product inside that cooler. Same setup, right? Same refrigeration cycle. We're taking heat from one place and moving it to another. The difference is how much on the latent side are we doing? And the way we can control that is with the TD. The larger the TD, the more humidity you remove. The lower the TD, the less humidity you remove.
Clifton, this might be a whole topic for a different discussion.
I was just sitting here, thinking about this. I used to design a lot of floral boxes. And so I think we're going to have to do a show where we use the same cubic foot box for different purposes and do a BTU comparison.
I used to design a lot of floral boxes and wine cellars.
Oh, absolutely.
So think about a wine cellar where you're trying to keep the cork of the bottle wet.
Right.
Yeah.
But a lot of my customers had investment bottles of wine. So you have to keep the cork wet, but you have to keep the label dry. Because just like baseball cards, if the corners of the card get damaged, on collectible bottles of wine, if the label gets damaged, if the label gets moist, the value of that bottle goes down. So now it's a really neat trick to keep the cork wet to maintain the integrity of the wine, but keep the label on the bottle dry.
It's amazing how
I didn't know you did floral. I used to specialize in floral and wine, which is actually pretty cool.
It's amazing how many HVAC conversations end up talking about alcohol.
So for this episode, Clifton, to put a kind of a summary on this, if you're in that bubble that we illustrated there, that's the corn sweat bubble. And for those of you that don't know, now you know, right? That is a word you can add to your vocabulary, use it in the classroom. People will say, what is that? And then you can get into the whole conversation of what it is. But
let me tell you,
during these few weeks, this season, if you will, of corn sweat that we're having, if your system has inefficiencies or improper design, on most days, the system will hide that, right? It's cooling properly, it's doing its thing. But on these days, during this time, those inefficiencies or those problems or those design issues are going to come to the front. They are going to become acute and very apparent. And you're going to be calling your HVAC company saying, listen, my unit's not keeping up. It's not doing this. And again, it's directly related to this little mini season that we're in. It's exposing issues with the air conditioner or heat pump that aren't apparent on other days.
I'm about to send this episode to my son.
This was a lot of fun, gentlemen.
It was really
love it.
the stats, all of the, we could definitely do again, I'm totally interested in jumping on a show about the boxes and the humidity and the TD. TD is a big thing. That's how we really know humidity is being removed.
I think we're going to have to. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for hanging in, especially so many of you who there wasn't the pre-notice out there. It came in a little bit late. We still had a wonderful crowd. We hope that you join us again next week. We love hanging out with you. We love talking about these interesting and fun and sometimes off-the-wall topics within our industry, within our realm, but it helps us understand everything as a whole. So we encourage you all to dive deeper into psychrometrics without tears to have a better understanding of the charts that we were using today. We encourage you all to join us at the National HVAC, our education conference. If you need any additional resources for your classroom, info's down at the bottom. And we'll see you all again next week on Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC show. Bye, everybody.